Hello everybody. Today we'll be talking about Article 14, that is standard for examination of documents. So let's move on to A. An issuing bank and any nominated bank must examine all the documents stipulated in the credit in accordance with international standard banking practice to determine on the basis of the documents alone. Means an issuing bank and a nominated bank, they should check the documents, okay, being under the guidance of ISPP UCP 600 and the terms and conditions of the credit only. So on the basis of these, documents are checked by an issuing bank and a nominated bank. And another sentence, what it says is whether or not they appear on their face be in compliance with the terms and conditions of the credit. So to clarify this sentence, let me give one example. Like while issuing an LC, if the port of loading is mentioned like any European port, and while checking the bill of lading, if the port of loading is mentioned like Switzerland port, then the bank is not liable to check if Switzerland port falls in European port or not, okay? Because while issuing an LC, and the issuing bank has used the clause that is ambiguous in nature, okay? So those unclear clauses, those unclear conditions are disregarded while checking the document, okay? Bank just check the documents in general terms, not bank doesn't go in details or in-depth analysis while checking the document, okay? So by putting those types of ambiguous clauses, the risk also passes to the issuing bank and the applicant. So that is what our 14A talks about, okay? Now let's move on to 14B. An issuing bank and any nominated bank shall each have a maximum period of 5 banking days following the day of receipt of the presentation to examine the documents and determine compliance, okay? So if the documents are presented by the beneficiary to the nominated bank today, then the nominated bank has 5 more days, banking days, to check the document, okay, and the issuing and for the issuing bank as well, okay, to determine if the documents are a credit compliant or not. So next sentence says the period for examination of documents doesn't depend on any upcoming expiry date or latest date for presentation. Like if the document are presented on the latest date of presentation, that is today, by the beneficiary, or if the last date of presentation and the expiry date are same, and on the same date the beneficiary, if the beneficiary present a document, the nominated bank still have like 5 more banking days to check the documents, no matter the expiry date or the last date of presentation has elapsed, okay? Now let's move on to 14C. A presentation that includes one or more original transfer documents of the type described in Articles 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24 must be made not later than 21 days after the date of shipment as evidenced by the transfer document. In any event, the presentation must occur not later than the expiry date of the credit, okay? So article 19 to 24 is related with transfer document, okay? And the transfer document, no matter if it is in one set or two set or three sets, three original sets, okay, those documents, transfer documents must be presented to the negotiating bank or nominated bank within 21 days after the date of the shipment, okay? If it is not presented within 21 days after the date of shipment to the presenting bank, then it will be treated as discrepancy. So that is why those documents should be in those documents, and along with other supporting document must be presented to the nominated bank within the 21 days after the date of shipment, and those documents also must be presented within the expiry date of the credit, okay, in order to make the document compliant. Now let's move on to D. Data in a document, when read in context with the credit, the document itself and international banking practice need not be identical to, but must not conflict with, data in that document, any other stipulated document or the credit. Okay, so what it means to say is that the data or the information mentioned in the document. Okay, first it should not conflict with the letter of credit terms and condition, and it should not conflict with the document itself. Okay, and it should not conflict with international banking practice. Okay, and and it should not conflict, and that data should not conflict with other stipulated document presented. For example, if the LC if in a LC, if the description of goods is like Australian green peas, and when the document is presented, and if in the document the description of goods is like Australian peas only, then it is not a discrepancy. Okay, the data didn't conflict here. But if like the description of good is mentioned like Australian red peas, then there is a problem because the data conflict here. Now let's move on to E. In documents other than the commercial invoice, the description of the goods, services, or performance, if stated, may be in general terms not conflicting with the description in the credit. Okay, so the description of goods should be written in full details in commercial invoice as mentioned in LC field number 45A, whereas those descriptions should be written in general terms in other documents. Okay, but they should not conflict with the description in the credit. Like if the description of the goods is Australian green peas, and if the description of goods is mentioned like peas or Australian peas in other documents, then it is considered as valid. Okay, but if the description of goods is mentioned like Australian yellow peas, then there is a problem because the data conflict here. So so what is and so that is what E means to say. Okay, now let's move on to F. If a credit requires presentation of a document other than a transport document, insurance document, or commercial invoice without stipulating by whom the document is to be issued or its data content, banks will accept the document as presented if its content appears to fulfill the function of the required document and otherwise complies with sub-article 14D. So besides like a commercial invoice, transport document, or insurance document, if the bank calls for the document without mentioning by whom the document is to be issued and without mentioning the data content of that document, then then the bank will accept the document as presented. Means like if in the documents required, if the bank calls for a document like health certificate in 2 copies. Okay, so here it is not mentioned by whom the health certificate to be issued, and what content to be mentioned in the health certificate is also not mentioned. So if the document is presented in blank paper and mentioning health certificate only, then the bank needs to accept those sort of document as well. Okay, now let's move on to G. A document presented but not required by the credit will be disregarded and may be returned to the presented. Okay, so unnecessary document and that is not required by the credit will not be checked by the bank, and those documents will be returned to the presenter. Okay, so let's move on to H. If a credit contains a condition without stipulating the document to indicate compliance with the condition, banks will deem such condition as not stated and will disregard it. So let me clarify this uh, article. Okay, like in additional condition in field number 47A, sometimes we mention the condition like all inland haulage charges from Calcutta to final destination will be borne by the applicant. Okay, uh, goods should be of good quality. So if those conditions are mentioned in the credit, and for that conditions documents are not required, so bank will consider those conditions are not mentioned and will disregard it because there is no there is no any basis for like checking those types of conditions in the letter of credit. Okay, now let's read I. A document may be dated prior to the issuance date of the credit but must not be dated later than the date of its presentation. Okay, so actually this clause is for the goods like oil, okay, where the shipment is made like prior to the issuance of the LC. So what it means to say is that those sort of documents can be dated prior to the issuance of the letter of credit, but those documents must not be like dated later than the date of presentation. Suppose today is the last day of presentation, okay, to present the document, then if the like document is dated tomorrow, then that will be a discrepancy. So the document should not be dated later than the date of its presentation, okay, but it can be dated prior to the issuance date. Now let's move on to J. When the addresses of the beneficiary and the applicant appear in any stipulated document, they need not be the same as those stated in the credit or in any other stipulated document, but must be within the same country as the respective addresses mentioned in the credit. Okay, so on the applicant and beneficiary address mentioned in the letter of credit should not be same in the documents presented. Okay, but they must be in the same country. Okay, contact details like telefax, telephone, email and the like stated as the part of the beneficiaries and applicants address will be disregarded or will be ignored. Okay, so if it is mentioned in the LC also, and if it is not mentioned in the document, then it will be it will not be considered as discrepancy. Now let's move on to next sentence. However, when the address and the contact details of the applicant appear as part of the consignee or notified party details on the transport document subject to Article 19 to 25, they must be stated, they must be as stated in the credit. Okay, but the applicant address and the contact details of the applicant as mentioned in the credit should be same. Okay, especially in the transfer document, and the transfer document is like from Article 19 to 25. Okay, so in the transfer document the address and the contact detail of the applicant should be same. Okay, as notified party or as consignee. Now let's move on to K. The shipper or consignor of the goods indicated on any document and need not be the beneficiary of the credit. Okay, so actually this clause is for especially for transferable LC where the shipper may be more than one. Okay, that is why for transferable LC this clause has been implemented. Okay, so almost 95% of the shipping documents, the name of the shipper is beneficiary. Okay, but here what is mentioned is like the shipper or consignor of the goods indicated on any document need not be the beneficiary. So if the shipper's name is not mentioned as beneficiary or other party, then it can be considered as compliant. Okay, so it will not be considered as discrepancy. Now let's move on to L. A transfer document may be issued by any party other than a carrier, owner, master or charterer, provided that the transfer document meets the requirement of articles 19 to 24 of these rules. Okay, so the transfer document can be issued by like a carrier, owner, master or charterer, but if they are going to issue the transfer document, then there are some requirements, okay, that is mentioned in article 19 to 24. So if they fulfill all those requirements, then this party can issue a transfer document. Okay, so that is all about this article 14. Hope you like this video. If you do have any comment, please write it down. Thank you.